For years, the world watched Prince Louis charm his way through royal events with mischievous grins and playful antics. The cameras loved him. The public adored him. He was the carefree youngest child of the future king, spontaneous, joyful, unburdened by the weight of the crown. But behind the palace gates, a very different story was unfolding. Staff members exchanged worried glances. Medical appointments were scheduled in secret. And late at night, when the cameras were gone and the crowds had dispersed, Prince William and Catherine would sit together in stunned silence, processing news that would shatter their world. Just moments ago, a palace doctor broke protocol and revealed something so devastating that it threatens to rewrite everything we thought we knew about the young prince's future. A diagnosis that William and Kate fought desperately to keep private. A medical reality that raises uncomfortable questions about what happens when a member of the royal family can no longer perform the role they were born into. What has been hidden from the public? And more importantly, why? Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any updates before we delve deeper into the true implications of this revelation for the Wales family. At first glance, Prince Louis appeared to be everything a royal child should be. Waving enthusiastically from Buckingham Palace balconies during Trooping the Colour, making faces during the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations that became instant viral sensations, tugging at his mother's hand during walkabouts, radiating the kind of unfiltered joy that made him a media favorite. The public saw a charming, spirited boy. What they didn't see were the moments that happened between those carefully orchestrated photo opportunities. But something much darker was developing behind the carefully managed facade, and those closest to the family knew it. Royal staff began noticing troubling patterns early on. According to a former household member who spoke on condition of anonymity, Louis's behavior at private family gatherings was markedly different from his public persona. There were moments when he would simply disconnect, the source revealed, their voice barely above a whisper. He'd be engaged 1 minute, laughing and playing, and then suddenly it was like a light switched off. He'd stare at nothing, completely unreachable. At first, we thought he was just daydreaming. Children do that, but this was different. This was frequent, and it was getting worse. The staff member described instances where Louis would become agitated without apparent cause, where routine transitions, moving from one room to another, changing activities, would trigger disproportionate distress. We were told not to discuss it, the source continued. There was an unspoken understanding that these episodes were private family matters, but as time went on, it became impossible to ignore. This wasn't typical childhood behavior. Something was happening to that little boy, and no one was talking about it. Other members of the Wales household staff began quietly departing their positions, citing vague personal reasons or family commitments. But their faces told a different story when questioned privately. They looked troubled, conflicted, burdened by knowledge they couldn't share. One nanny, who had worked with the family for nearly 2 years, left abruptly in late 2024. She refused all interview requests and signed an expanded non-disclosure agreement that included penalties far exceeding standard royal employment contracts. Friends say she was visibly shaken by whatever she had witnessed, but legally prohibited from discussing any details. The exodus of experienced staff raised eyebrows within royal circles, but outside observers assumed it was simply the normal turnover that occurs in high-pressure positions. The truth, however, was far more concerning. Those who remained were bound by increasingly strict confidentiality protocols. Internal communications about Louis's care were conducted through encrypted channels. Medical appointments were scheduled under pseudonyms. Even within Kensington Palace, information about the young prince's condition was compartmentalized on a strict need-to-know basis. They were building a wall of silence, one former palace communications officer explained. Every piece of information about Louis was controlled, vetted, and sanitized before it could reach the public. But you can't hide everything forever. The cracks were starting to show. Behavioral experts who study royal family dynamics began noticing something unusual in footage from major public events. While Prince George and Princess Charlotte displayed age-appropriate behavior, composed during formal occasions, relaxed during casual appearances, Louis exhibited patterns that seemed inconsistent and sometimes concerning. At the 2023 coronation, Louis was notably absent from several key moments. Official explanations cited his young age and the length of the ceremony, but observers noted that he was older than several other children who participated fully. When he did appear, he seemed subdued, almost withdrawn, a stark contrast to his typically animated public persona. During the 2024 Trooping the Color, cameras caught brief moments when Louis appeared to be struggling. His hands moved repetitively in what body language experts later identified as self-soothing gestures. His gaze seemed unfocused during portions of the ceremony, and in several frames, royal handlers could be seen positioning themselves unusually close to the young prince, as if prepared to intervene. What we're seeing is a child who appears to be experiencing some form of sensory or emotional overwhelm, explained Dr. Maria Castellanos, a child development specialist who reviewed publicly available footage. The way he covers his ears during loud moments, the way he retreats physically when crowds surge, these aren't just signs of a shy or mischievous child. These are adaptive responses to environmental stimuli that he's finding difficult to process. Dr. Castellanos was careful to note that she had never examined Louis personally and could only comment on observable behavior. But her assessment aligned with concerns that medical professionals within the royal household had been quietly documenting for months. Even more telling was what wasn't shown. Media outlets that typically cover every moment of royal children's public appearances began receiving unusual guidance from palace communications teams. Multiple photographers reported being asked to avoid certain angles or to refrain from publishing images that showed Louis in moments of apparent distress. While such requests aren't entirely unusual, the palace has long sought to protect royal children's privacy. The frequency and specificity of these interventions suggested something more significant was being concealed. We were told certain images weren't representative of the prince's character, one royal photographer revealed. But these weren't unflattering photos. They were just real moments. A child looking overwhelmed. A child seeking comfort from his parents. Normal things. But they didn't want normal. They wanted perfect. And that's when you know something's wrong. Television broadcasts began cutting away from Louis at curious moments. Live feeds would switch to different camera angles precisely when the young prince appeared to be struggling. In one notable instance during a 2024 garden party, coverage abruptly shifted to Prince William, just as Louis seemed to be having difficulty with the noise and crowding. These weren't technical glitches. They were deliberate editorial choices, coordinated with palace media teams to maintain a carefully constructed image that was increasingly disconnected from reality. The silence from usually vocal royal commentators was equally conspicuous. Journalists who built careers analyzing every gesture and expression of royal children suddenly had nothing to say about Prince Louis's evolving public presence. When pressed, several admitted off-record that they'd been strongly advised to focus their coverage elsewhere. There was an implicit understanding, one longtime royal correspondent explained. You could write about George's resemblance to his father. You could discuss Charlotte's confident presence. But Louis was off limits for anything beyond superficial cute kid content. The message was clear. Don't look too closely. This coordinated media management suggested that whatever was happening with Prince Louis, the palace considered it serious enough to require unprecedented levels of control and concealment. Behind the scenes, Prince William and Catherine were facing a parent's worst nightmare, watching their child struggle while being unable to shield him from the relentless scrutiny that comes with royal life. According to sources close to the family, William became increasingly protective of Louis's privacy in early 2024, insisting on reduced public appearances and longer recovery periods between events. These requests put him at odds with senior palace advisors who argued that public visibility was essential for maintaining the monarchy's connection with the people. William was adamant, one insider revealed. He'd seen what happened when his mother was forced to perform despite personal struggles. He'd watched his brother deteriorate under the pressure of public life. He wasn't going to let that happen to his son. But the institution doesn't accommodate weakness easily, even when that weakness is a child's medical condition. Catherine, according to multiple sources, became Louis's fiercest advocate within the palace structure. Having experienced her own serious health crisis and the invasive media coverage that accompanied it, she understood intimately the cost of being a royal under scrutiny while facing private medical challenges. She reportedly clashed with senior courtiers who wanted to maintain Louis's public schedule, arguing that a young child's well-being should take precedence over tradition and public relations. These confrontations, while kept strictly confidential, created tension between the Wales household and the broader palace apparatus. Kate wasn't asking for special treatment, a source close to the princess explained. She was asking for basic human decency, for her child to be allowed to develop at his own pace without being forced onto a public stage before he was ready. But that's not how the system works. In the monarchy, duty comes first, always, even when duty demands something that might harm a child. It was during this period of escalating concern and internal conflict that the decision was made to bring in outside expertise, someone who could provide an objective medical assessment without the institutional bias that colored palace decision-making. Enter Dr. Eleanor Harrington. Dr. Harrington wasn't a typical royal physician. She had spent 2 decades specializing in pediatric neurodevelopmental disorders, working with families across the world who were navigating complex diagnoses in high-pressure environments. Her reputation for discretion was matched only by her reputation for unwavering clinical honesty, a combination that made her both ideal for this situation and potentially dangerous to palace image management. She was introduced to the Wales family through a trusted intermediary, ostensibly as an educational consultant, reviewing learning programs for all 3 children. This cover story allowed her presence at Kensington Palace to remain unremarkable to outside observers, while giving her unprecedented access to observe Louis in his daily routines. What Dr. Harrington discovered during her initial weeks of observation would ultimately lead to the diagnosis that William and Kate had feared but could no longer deny. We're getting to the heartbreaking truth, but first, if you haven't already, please subscribe and turn on notifications. The next part of this story reveals exactly what the doctor found and why it changes everything for the young prince's future. Dr. Harrington's assessment didn't happen in a single clinical appointment. It unfolded over careful weeks of observation, interaction, and increasingly sophisticated diagnostic evaluation. She watched Louis during structured educational activities, where he demonstrated intelligence and creativity that matched or exceeded typical developmental benchmarks. She observed him during unstructured play, noting both his imaginative capacity and the subtle ways he struggled with certain types of social interaction. But it was during simulated public scenarios, rehearsals for upcoming appearances that the palace routinely conducted with royal children, that the most concerning patterns emerged. According to leaked excerpts from Dr. Harrington's preliminary notes, Louis exhibited what she described as significant sensory processing difficulties combined with atypical emotional regulation patterns. In clinical terms, his nervous system struggled to filter and manage the overwhelming input that came with public royal life. The flash of cameras could trigger acute distress that he'd learned to mask with practiced smiles. The roar of crowds created sensory overload that manifested as either hyperactive performance or complete withdrawal. The constant physical contact from strangers during walkabouts, all those hands reaching to shake his, to pat his head, to touch him, registered as invasive and threatening rather than affectionate. He's developed extraordinary coping mechanisms, Dr. Harrington reportedly wrote. His public persona is essentially a protective performance, a learned behavior that allows him to survive these environments rather than engage with them authentically. But the cognitive and emotional cost of maintaining this performance is unsustainable. She documented episodes where Lewis would return from public appearances and need hours of quiet isolation to regulate his nervous system. Times when the effort of maintaining his cheerful public image would result in emotional crashes that left him exhausted and occasionally despondent. "Why do I have to pretend?" he reportedly asked during one of their sessions, a question that devastated Dr. Harrington with his painful clarity. "Why can't I just be quiet when I want to be quiet?" As her evaluation progressed, Dr. Harrington requested more specialized assessments, neurological scans, developmental screenings, consultations with specialists in sensory, processing disorders, and childhood anxiety conditions. The tests were conducted at private medical facilities under assumed names, with results delivered directly to William and Catherine before being shared with any palace officials. The couple wanted to understand their son's condition fully before institutional concerns about public relations could influence medical interpretation. What those tests revealed was both a relief and a devastating blow. Lewis didn't have a degenerative condition. His intelligence was unaffected. His long-term physical health wasn't in jeopardy. In those ways, the news could have been far worse. But what he did have was a diagnosis that fundamentally challenged his ability to fulfill the role he'd been born into. A neurodevelopmental condition characterized by heightened sensory sensitivity, difficulty with emotional regulation under stress, and a neurological profile that made the performative demands of royal life acutely traumatic. The formal diagnosis, which palace sources confirmed but refused to name publicly, placed Lewis on a spectrum of conditions that affect how the brain processes sensory information and manages stress responses. With proper support, accommodation, and understanding, children with similar profiles can thrive. They can lead fulfilling, successful lives. But those lives typically don't involve being paraded before crowds of thousands, photographed by hundreds of cameras, and expected to perform flawlessly under intense public scrutiny from early childhood. The condition itself isn't the tragedy, Dr. Harrington reportedly told William and Catherine during the consultation where she delivered her findings. The tragedy would be forcing him to live a life that's fundamentally incompatible with how his nervous system functions. You can't train a child out of a neurological condition. You can only traumatize him by demanding he suppress it. According to sources present for that meeting, Catherine broke down completely. William, witnesses say, looked physically ill. The color drained from his face as the full implications of the diagnosis settled over him. Because this wasn't just about their son having a medical condition that required management. This was about their son having a condition that made his predetermined future potentially impossible. The question that hung unspoken in the room: what happens to a prince who can't perform being a prince? Dr. Harrington's recommendations were clear, and from the palace's perspective, completely unworkable. Lewis should be removed from all public appearances immediately and indefinitely. His participation in royal events should be voluntary and only after extensive preparation with adequate support systems in place. His education should be adapted to his sensory and emotional needs rather than maintaining appearances of normal royal schooling. Most importantly, his future role within the institution should be reconsidered entirely, with options ranging from a reduced public presence to complete withdrawal from official duties as he matured. She essentially told them that Lewis needed to stop being a working royal, one source familiar with the recommendations explained. Not temporarily, permanently, or at least until he was old enough to make an informed choice about whether he could manage that life with his condition. For William and Catherine, these recommendations aligned with their parental instincts. They'd watched Lewis struggle. They'd seen the emotional toll. They knew in their hearts that forcing their son to continue performing would cause genuine harm. But they also understood the institutional resistance they would face. Because accepting Dr. Harrington's recommendations meant acknowledging that a member of the direct royal line couldn't fulfill basic expectations of public duty. It meant admitting that the system, with its relentless demands for visibility, performance, and traditional participation, was fundamentally incompatible with certain types of human neurology. William reportedly insisted on a meeting with King Charles to discuss the diagnosis and Dr. Harrington's recommendations. That meeting, which took place at Windsor Castle in early January 2025, would become one of the most contentious private confrontations in recent royal history. Catherine, who attended the meeting, reportedly said simply, "He's 6 years old. He shouldn't have to suffer for an institution. The institution should adapt to protect him." The king's response, according to sources, was sympathetic, but ultimately focused on institutional concerns. He reportedly acknowledged the difficulty of the situation, but questioned whether completely withdrawing Louis from public life would create more problems than it solved. "What precedent does this set?" Charles allegedly asked. "If one royal child can opt out of duties due to medical conditions, what's to stop others? Where does this accommodation end and institutional collapse begin?" The question revealed the fundamental tension at the heart of this crisis. A modern monarchy claiming to value mental health and well-being, while simultaneously operating according to centuries-old principles that demand duty above all else, regardless of personal cost. William's response, according to witnesses, was sharp and definitive. "Then the institution needs to evolve, because I won't sacrifice my child's mental health to preserve an image. Not for you, not for the press, and not for tradition." The meeting ended without resolution, but with an agreement to consult additional specialists and explore potential compromises that might protect both Louis's well-being and the palace's institutional interests. But compromises, as it turned out, were becoming impossible to maintain, because the secret that William and Kate had fought so desperately to protect was about to become public in the most devastating way possible. The leak didn't come from Dr. Harrington. Her professional ethics and contractual obligations ensured her silence. It didn't come from palace staff, most of whom remained unaware of the specific details of Louis's diagnosis. It came from the medical record system itself. In late January 2025, portions of Dr. Harrington's diagnostic report were accessed by an unauthorized individual, later identified as a contractor working on IT systems at one of the private medical facilities where Louis had been evaluated. That individual, motivated by financial gain, leaked redacted excerpts to a media outlet known for publishing sensitive royal information. The outlet initially approached Kensington Palace for comment, offering the family an opportunity to control the narrative. But William and Catherine, devastated by the breach of their son's medical privacy, refused to engage. "They wanted us to confirm details of our 6-year-old son's medical condition so they could publish it," one source close to the couple explained. As if there was any world in which responsible parents would do that. They were going to publish regardless of our response, and they knew it. On February 10th, 2025, the story broke worldwide. The headlines were simultaneously sensational and vague, revealing enough to shock but carefully avoiding specifics that might expose the outlet to legal liability. Palace doctor reveals concerning diagnosis for Prince Louis. Young royal's secret medical condition explains erratic public behavior. William and Kate devastated by son's neurological diagnosis. The articles included excerpts from the leaked medical documentation, describing Louis's sensory processing difficulties and emotional regulation challenges. They quoted Dr. Harrington's assessment that continued exposure to public royal life could cause significant psychological harm. They speculated about what this meant for Louis's future role and whether he would ever be able to fulfill royal duties. Within hours, the story had spread across every major news platform globally. Social media exploded with speculation, sympathy, and unfortunately, cruel commentary about whether a prince with such a diagnosis could be considered fit for royal life. The palace's initial response was a terse statement condemning the grotesque invasion of privacy regarding a young child's confidential medical information and announcing that legal action would be pursued against those responsible for the leak. But behind that formal statement, William and Catherine were experiencing every parent's nightmare, watching their child's private struggles become public entertainment. According to sources close to the couple, William was absolutely enraged, not at the diagnosis itself, which he'd accepted and was prepared to manage privately, but at the violation of his son's privacy and the media's willingness to exploit a child's medical condition for clicks and revenue. Catherine, still recovering from her own recent health challenges, was described as shattered. She'd fought so hard to protect Louis from this exact scenario. The public dissection of his differences, the speculation about his capabilities, the reduction of a complex, beautiful child to a diagnosis, and its implications for an institution. They knew this would happen eventually, one family friend explained. The palace can't keep secrets forever, but they'd hoped to control how and when Louis's condition became known, if it ever needed to be known publicly at all. Having it ripped away like this, turned into scandal fodder, it's every parent's worst nightmare, magnified by the fact that billions of people are now discussing their 6-year-old son's medical privacy. The immediate aftermath of the revelation was chaotic. Kensington Palace went into full crisis management mode, but this wasn't a scandal that could be spun or managed through traditional public relations strategies. This was a fundamental question about privacy, childhood, disability rights, and whether the modern monarchy could accommodate neurodiversity within its ranks. Child welfare advocates immediately condemned the media coverage, arguing that publishing details of a minor's medical diagnosis without parental consent violated both ethical journalism standards and potentially legal protections for children's privacy. Disability rights organizations issued statements supporting Louis and calling for the palace to make reasonable accommodations rather than forcing him to mask his condition or withdraw from public life entirely. But the most painful responses came from those questioning whether Louis should remain in the line of succession at all, arguing that a royal who couldn't handle public appearances wasn't fit for potential future duties, even though he was 6th in line and extremely unlikely to ever become king. These comments devastated William and Catherine, who saw their son being judged and found wanting based on neurological differences he couldn't control. People are treating him like he's broken, one source close to Catherine revealed. Like because his brain processes information differently, he's somehow less valuable or less capable. It's exactly the kind of ableist thinking that we should have moved beyond as a society, but apparently the royal family is held to different standards. The public reaction was mixed but generally sympathetic. Polls showed that a significant majority of British citizens supported reducing Louis's public duties and believed his privacy should have been protected. Many parents of neurodivergent children expressed solidarity and shared their own experiences of navigating a world not designed for their children's needs. But there was also a darker undercurrent. Comments on social media questioning Louis's weakness, comparing him unfavorably to his siblings, or suggesting that real royals wouldn't have such conditions. These responses, while in the minority, were amplified enough to reach the family and cause additional pain. For Louis himself, sources say the impact has been carefully managed, but unavoidable. At 6 years old, he's aware that something has changed, that people are talking about him differently, that his parents are upset, that his life is being discussed by strangers. They've tried to shield him, one insider explained, but he knows something happened. He knows people are talking about him, and he's starting to internalize the idea that there's something wrong with him that makes people treat him differently. That's the real heartbreak, watching a child begin to see himself through the lens of public judgment rather than his parents' unconditional love. Now, 3 weeks after the diagnosis became public, the royal family faces unprecedented questions about how to move forward. William and Catherine have made their position clear. Louis's well-being comes first, institutional expectations second. They've reportedly insisted that he be withdrawn from all scheduled public appearances for the foreseeable future and that any future participation be entirely voluntary and adequately supported. Senior palace officials, however, are concerned about the precedent this sets and the public perception of a royal child who's unable to fulfill basic duties. There's pressure to present Louis publicly soon to demonstrate that he's fine and to quell speculation about the severity of his condition. This tension between parental protection and institutional demands remains unresolved. Dr. Harrington, who has maintained professional silence despite the leak of her report, is reportedly in discussion with the family about ongoing support and potential public education initiatives that might help people understand neurodiversity in general without exploiting Louis's specific situation. Meanwhile, the legal pursuit of those responsible for the leak continues, though sources suggest the damage is already done and no legal victory can restore the privacy that was violated. The broader question remains, can the monarchy adapt to accommodate neurodivergent royal? Or does the institution's reliance on traditional performance and public visibility make it fundamentally incompatible with certain neurological differences? Some royal observers argue that this crisis presents an opportunity for the monarchy to demonstrate modern values, to show that it can evolve beyond rigid expectations and embrace members whose contributions might look different from traditional royal duties. Others contend that the monarchy's entire purpose is rooted in tradition, ceremony, and public performance, that removing those expectations fundamentally changes what it means to be royal. For William and Catherine, these philosophical debates are secondary to a more immediate concern, protecting their son and helping him grow up with confidence and self-worth, despite being different from what the institution and the public expect. They don't care about preserving some abstract idea of what the monarchy should look like, one close friend revealed. They care about Louis growing up healthy and happy and secure in who he is. If the monarchy can't accommodate that, then as far as they're concerned, the monarchy needs to change. Their son is not a problem to be solved or hidden. He's a child who deserves to be loved and accepted exactly as he is. The coming months will reveal whether that hope is realistic or whether the weight of tradition, public expectation, and institutional inertia will force difficult choices that no parent should have to make. What's certain is that the revelation of Prince Louis's diagnosis has exposed fundamental tensions within the modern monarchy, tensions between image and reality, tradition and adaptation, institutional demands and human needs. And at the center of it all is a 6-year-old boy who never asked to be born into this life, who never chose the scrutiny and expectations that came with his royal status, and who now must navigate a world that's discussing his private medical condition as if it's public property. The palace wanted to keep this secret to protect the illusion of royal perfection. William and Kate wanted to keep it secret to protect their son's childhood and privacy. But now that the truth is out, the question is no longer what was hidden. The question is what happens next. Will Prince Louis be allowed to grow up at his own pace, supported and accommodated? Or will the pressure to perform, to conform, to fulfill expectations regardless of personal cost continue to define royal childhood? Will the monarchy prove capable of embracing neurodiversity and demonstrating that royal duty can take many forms? Or will it cling to outdated standards that equate worth with performative ability? The answers to those questions won't just determine Louis's future. They'll reveal whether the British monarchy can truly claim to represent modern values or whether it remains trapped in traditions that have no room for human variation. Make sure you're subscribed because this story is far from over. The next decisions made by William, Catherine, and the palace will shape not just one child's life, but the future of the entire institution. And we'll be here to cover every development. For now, Prince Louis remains out of the public eye, protected by parents who are fighting the full weight of centuries-old tradition to give their son what every child deserves, the right to be himself, exactly as he is. And that fight is only just beginning.